At the time, Adams Academy was considered the best prep school education of the day. President John Adams funded the school when it began in 1872. Students were given strict rules based on their behavior during school hours. They couldn't leave between 7 in the evening to 7 in the morning. All smoking materials were prohibited and outings to pool halls or bars were banned. The first semester had a total of 24 students, but as the school grew, so did the amount of students. Dr. Everett ran the academy from 1878 to 1907, with a quick sabbatical in 1893. Due to financial issues, on June 22, 1907, the Adams Academy closed down for good.
The Josiah Quincy is in the midst of a multi-year project that will leave this historic home look like it did in the 1880s. The house is a National Historic Landmark and is located on Muirhead Street in Woolston. The house was built in 1770 in the Revolutionary War. The house was built by Colonel Josiah Quincy in the first in a long line. The house remained a Quincy for generations and is now owned in a private historic New England.
One of Quincy's main attractions is the Hancock Cemetery. The Hancock Cemetery is well known mostly because of the important people that are buried there. All of them have played a big part in America's history. Some of them are Henry, who was the first Adams in Quincy, also John Hancock, who is well known for being the first signer of the Declaration of Independence, and lastly, Colonel John Quincy, whom the city of Quincy is named after. There are 800 graves in the Hancock Cemetery that are important to many people.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of Obscure and Interesting U.S. History Fact Bites. Today's tasty fact tidbit is the Thomas Crane Public Library and its strange history. The library is named after Thomas Crane, a young man who learned the Quincy granite cutting trade and, at the age of 26, left to try his luck in New York City. Half a century later, his son Albert Crane came to Quincy with $20,000 to spend on building a memorial library for his father. He hired Henry Hobson Richardson, the foremost architect of the day there. The Romanesque building he created now houses a periodical reading room containing old magazines of every topic and 2 quiet study rooms. The name of the library comes from the man who dedicated it, Charles Francis Adams Jr. He insisted upon calling it the Thomas Crane Public Library, rather than the Quincy Free Public Library. After the dedication, President John Adams' small collection of books was stored there until 1893, when they were moved to the Boston Public Library. The reason for this was that in 11 years, only 2 people had went to see them. The library was once hidden behind a grain store, a hotel, an office building, and 4 houses on Washington Street. Albert Crane bought all of these buildings and tore them down, leaving a large field for future enhancements to the library. But before they even managed to seed it, World War I arrived. Thinking that food will win the war, the city turned it into a potato farm, which was taken care of by an expert from Maine. Unfortunately, the harvest was awful. There wasn't a potato in the lot that was anywhere near the size of a golf ball, said the former Quincy mayor, Joseph L. Whiten. The entire harvest was donated to the farm. Before his death, Albert Crane donated $64,000 to build the Spear Street wing of the library. Later, the rest of the Crane family donated $164,000 for a freestanding addition to the library. Another addition that almost doubled the size of the library was built in the spring of 2001. It cost nearly $18 million and was funded by the City of Quincy with grants from the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, the Massachusetts Historical Commission, and nearly $1 million in private donations. The Thomas Crane Public Library is located at 40 Washington Street in Quincy, Massachusetts. It is open to the public free of charge. Its hours of operations are Monday to Thursday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., Friday to Saturday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Sunday from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. Well, that wraps up today's show. See you next time, and keep on fact munching.
Massachusetts started as a tiny spot of land on Quincy Shore in Massachusetts. Historian Daniel Neal remembers the sachem or sagamore who governed the Indians in this part of the country when the English first came, hither and hissed on a small hill or hummock, perhaps containing an acre and a half. Massachusetts Hummock is one of the few ancient sites in New England that have remained the same since they were developed. There is no admission fee charged to enter this historical site. The peninsula that sticks out of the bay there was named Squantum. Chickatiboo was the chief of the Massachusetts Indians that once was a great tribe that used the coast up north of Plymouth. It is located close to the junction of East Quantum Street.
Kilroy was set all over Quincy about 68 years ago. In the Steele's Four River shipyard is where James J. Kilroy was employed as a checker. A checker was someone who counted the number of holes filled by a riveter. How Kilroy made sure people were doing their job was by marking each one down with a chalk mark. Kilroy was walking by the office and overheard his boss and a riveter. His boss asked if Kilroy counted all the rivets, and the riveter said no. Once Kilroy heard the riveter say no, he got very heated because the riveter knows that Kilroy always does his job. After he heard that word, he charged into the office and wrote a message on the wall with huge letters. Kilroy was here. Many people wondered about that message, but people started to like it. Many people over the world started using the quote, but don't know what it means. Kilroy did a lot of hard work that he did not get a lot of credit for. The Hogan family wanted to show their respect to Kilroy. They thought about it for a very long time because they knew he did his work. Now Kilroy will have his honor and respect once they finish one of the first buildings of the $1.6 billion project in Quincy Center.
The Dorothy Quincy homestead is located on the corner of Hancock Street and Butler Road. This house is only open 5 days a year. The wallpaper in the house is cupids and flowers imported from France for Dorothy's wedding. There are many secret chambers and passages in the house used to hide the Patriots during the Revolution. To build the house, it took 6 Edmonds. Edmund I built part of the house in 1685, but mainly the house was built by Edmund III in 1706. The home belonged to Dorothy, the youngest of 8. She got married to John Hancock on August 28, 1775. Today the house belongs to the Society of Colonial Dames, who restored all the furniture and made the Dorothy Quincy home a national landmark.
Welcome, audience, to a brief informational session about the Hancock Cemetery. The Hancock Cemetery was the first burial ground for the very first Adam family member. Of all the hundreds of grave sites, there is one old burial ground that you might want to visit when you're in Quincy. Hundreds of years ago, there was an unsolved mystery of a married couple named John R. Grieve and Hannah Banks. This is something that I might want to look at. Maybe the audience will too. I remember there was a tomb in the Hancock Cemetery that has lines of wisdom. That is imprinted in this tomb. Well, that's all I have to say for today. Thank you for listening.
The USS Quincy was built in 1943 and was the second heavy boat to have the name. At the time, the president was Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill was the prime minister. The first time the president met the prime minister was on the island of Malta in the Mediterranean. Together, they went on to the Yalta Conference in the Russian Crimea. After that short respite, they went back to Quincy for war. They were supporting carrier strikes on the Okinawa and the Japanese home islands. When they entered Tokyo Bay on September 1st, the Japanese surrendered aboard the battleship Missouri, which ended World War II. The second ship was launched on June 23, 1943. This ship was built by Bethlehem's Four River Shipyard. It employed 32,000 men and women from Quincy and Hingham at their peak on January 15, 1935.
Hello there! Today I will be talking about the USS Salem. Although it was never fired a shot in anger, it was a real warship from the Cold War. It was launched in 1949 and was in active duty for 10 years and is now a museum. There's also a maze on Halloween.
The Hancock Cemetery in Hancock Square next to City Hall is open to the public. There's no fee to get in. Famous patriots are buried here like Henry Adams, John Hancock, and John Quincy, plus many more. There are over 800 graves made in memory of John R. Grieve, who died November 12, 1850, age 22, and his wife Hannah Banks died November 12, 1850, age 15, both from Zanesville, Ohio.
The Josiah Quincy house was built in 1770 by Old Colonel himself. Abigail Adams would go on the second floor to a window of their great-uncle's Josiah Quincy's house and watch the British ships. Josiah was a 66-year-old man. He would watch the ship's movements for his good friend George Washington. Then, March 17, 1776, the British evacuated Boston. The Josiah Quincy house has almost always been painted yellow, but recently they painted it beige. It was said most families passed their line from son to son. The Quincy's went from sire to sire. The Josiah Quincy house is in great preservation.
In 1949, when the present First Parish Church building was 121 years old, it was ruled officially that the church is older than the city itself and the town before it. The first church in these areas was established as a branch of the Church of Boston in 1636. It became in its own right in 1639. Quincy's first house of worship, the branch of the Church of Boston, was called the Chapel of Ease. If it was neglected by early historians, they were banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The new church, the one that lasted, was gathered by covenant on September 26, 1639, and it was holding services in its third meeting house in 1732, when its pastor was the Reverend John Hancock, father of the bold first signer of the Declaration of Independence. Soon when John and Abigail Adams died, they were tombed in the church, then joined by John Quincy Adams and his wife.
The Adams Mansion was built around the year 1731. Major Leonard Vassall built the small part of the present building. He was a wealthy West Indian sugar planter who lived in Cambridge. He apparently used it for a summer place. His daughter, Mrs. Anna Borland, was a loyalist during the Revolution. She left the house to live with the British forces when they were evacuating Boston in 1776. Mrs. Borland returned to the house after the Revolution. John Adams purchased the house from Mrs. Borland. He received the house on September 26, 1787. Abigail and John moved into the house, naming it Peace Field. They lived there in the house until they died. The house was later taken over by the U.S. National Park Service in 1946. It became the Adams National Historic Site at Peace Field.
Amelia Earhart and Harriet Quimby were both famous aviation pioneers in the year 1910. They both had their first air meet here in Quincy, Massachusetts in 1910 at the Naval Reserve Station that was established in 1923. The first competitive air show in the U.S. was organized by the Harvard Aero Society on September 3rd through 10th, which drew 22 flyers and 17 aircrafts as competitors, and President William Howard Taft as one of the 20,000 spectators. In 1913, the Harvard meet was to have featured a competition between Harriet Quimby and Blanche Scott, the first American woman to fly a plane, for the honor of flying the first air mail flight to New York.